Dorothy and I have been married next month for 83 years. I'm sorry, it just seems like...
I'm not that old.
It just seems like that when you're having a good time. You know how time flies. Actually, 47 years next month. And somebody was just telling me this morning, they were 49, and next year is 50, and that'll be a great celebration. But you know, in those years, and in even many less years, and sometimes in a matter of months, relationships have trouble. We were married 44 years when we hit the biggest trouble season of our marriage. Some of you know, due to health reasons, about 3.5 years ago, we went to a lifestyle change and started eating whole plant-based. And the 6 months to a year following that decision was the roughest 6 months to a year of our marriage. It was ugly. You see, something happened when we got home. We went to a 18-day in treatment center, and because my wife has diabetes and both of us have heart trouble, as do most Americans who are over the age of 3. And when we got home, I decided I would help cook. And so I started helping cooking. And I really enjoy cooking. And my wife has done a great job. You'll notice that she is sitting here, what I am saying. She's done a great job. As a pastor's wife, she entertained. But let me be honest, she doesn't care for the kitchen. She'd rather not have a kitchen in her house. But I enjoy the kitchen. And so when we came home, I invaded her space called the kitchen. And I said, well, we're going to throw everything out that we shouldn't be eating. And we went through the freezer. And we started going through cupboards. And she said, whoa, this is too fast. I said, no, it's not. We need to do this. And for the next 6 months to a year, as we made these changes, our marriage experienced the greatest stresses of the 46 years that we had been married. In fact, I sent her in tears a few times. One time, I brought in a new appliance called the Instapot. And my wife broke down in tears. It was not tears of joy, may I tell you. It was like, oh no, another thing I have to learn, another electronic thing I have to learn. And we worked through those months. You see, I was there not to bring distraught in her life, but I was there to serve her and help her, I thought. And in reality, I sent both of us into a time of trouble. And we've worked through that, and now it's easy, as long as one of us stays out of the kitchen. See, trouble in relationships is usually based in our wanting to control others, situations, and outcomes. Well, let me change that sentence, actually, because that's not a correct sentence. Trouble in relationships usually is based in my wanting to control others, situations, and outcomes. You see, that's what happens in our marriages, in our relationships, not only marriages, but in all of our relationships. Trouble is usually based when we want to control the other person, the situation, or the outcome. And trouble most often seems to happen and to come home to roost with those we love the most. Unfortunately, it's those we love. You see, when we love them, we want good outcomes for their life. We want them to have success. We want them to make right choices, even if we have to make them for them. And so we are in conflict with those who are closest to us. And often we can get away with it. Either we can get away with it because they love us and cut us grace, or it's the culture of our marriage or our relationship. But often, for whatever reason, we continue and get away with causing stress in our relationships. See, control in a relationship is driven by our expectations. Control. That's what I want in a relationship, and that's what brings trouble into it, because I'm trying to control others, the situation, or the outcome. But control in a relationship, what is driven by my expectations? And there's many types of expectations. There's the unspoken expectation. You know those, don't you? What did I do wrong? It's unspoken. Of course you did it wrong. I didn't tell you what I expected. There's the unrealistic. There's the unclear expectation. There's the transferred expectation. You know, the expectation I have on somebody else that I bring home to you, my spouse. Or the expectation I have on somebody else that I bring to another relationship. There's the expectation about future outcomes, because I'm expecting good things to come in the future. I'm expecting to have the cabin by the beach. That's a future outcome, expectation. And I'm expecting to have the party boat. And then there's the expectation of communication. I expect you to understand me no matter how I say it or what I say. I just expect you to understand what I mean. Bless God. What's your problem? Why don't you? This is a classic. There's generational differences. And I remember many times as lead pastor that I would talk to people on the staff, and I would say, well, I think we should do this. And they didn't realize when I said we, it meant you. And finally, I wised up, and I started saying, when people started working, I would say, now listen, I need to have a little talk with you. There's certain language I use that you need to understand. When I say we, it's you. And when I say me, it's me. But we is you. So whenever we should do something, that means you do it. But we have all these expectations on others, and the problem is I bring all of these different expectations into our relationships. The unspoken, the unrealistic, the communication, all of these things. I bring these expectations, and something happens. Now, in our day, what we're also wrestling with is there's 4 universal and major circumstances that has increased our expectations and tensions in this day. There's 4 things that are going on that we are all experiencing, no matter who we are. First of all, there's COVID that has hugely changed our expectations and tensions, because all of a sudden now we're expected to homeschool our kids. We're expected to stay home from work and work from home. And you don't understand. We don't have enough room to work from home. And all these different things that COVID has brought. There's the social justice upheaval that is going on, that we see on the TV at night. If you watch news, finally the fires have taken away the riots. I don't know which one's worse. But there's that social justice upheaval that is causing tensions and even within families. There's a season of politics that's causing tension. You know, there are family members, and I know them, not in my family, but I know the families that are not talking because one likes Trump and one doesn't like Trump. Now, I don't know who they like, they just don't like Trump. And they're not talking. There's this tension, there's these expectations that you'll understand why I like or don't like. Then there's the fire crisis, the smoke, the expectations and tensions that the fire has brought. So we have COVID, social justice, politics, and fire. And that's just what we all experience. And then there's the things you experience that no one else is experiencing. Last week after I shared on Sunday, I had several people come and talk to me and thank me, but they said, you know, I'm struggling, and they began to share their struggles of their own personal life that were relational, and both of them happened to be relational, but the tensions and the things that were going on in their personal life. See, there has been an increase of pressure on relationships, especially marriages. And that's why I want to talk, first of all, I want to zero on marriages, and then we're going to look at all relationships. Some of you are maybe enjoying the best marriage years of your life. I mean, you know, some people during all of this haven't been affected in their marriage. Maybe you've had to stay home and you've actually enjoyed each other staying home more and more. And whatever the situation, some of you are enjoying a great marriage season, and that's wonderful. But there's another group, a silent group, and maybe a silent majority who are struggling. Greg and I were talking before service about struggling. Pastor Steve said during worship something about struggling, many people struggling. There's actually a new term in our language called COVID divorce. In Italy, after the outbreak of COVID, and as they went through COVID, divorce was up 30%. In China, now they don't release the figures every year, except yearly, and they don't know what their figures are yet, but when they opened up China, the number of trips to divorce lawyers increased greatly. But I want to read to you, because we don't live in China and we don't live in Italy, but we do live here. The New York Post, September 1st, so this is just recent. I want to read you a couple paragraphs from the article. Divorce rates have spiked in the U.S. during the COVID pandemic as couples have been stuck at home for months. The number of people looking for divorces was 34% higher from March through June compared to last year. The combination of stress, unemployment, financial strain, death of loved ones, illness, homeschooling children, mental illness, and more has put a significant strain on relationships. The data showed that 31%, a third, 1 out of 3, that means about this many of who are here today. Listen. 31% of the couples admitted lockdown has caused irreparable damage to their relationships. The article concludes like this. It's possible that divorce rates will continue to rise as economic, financial, social, institutional, and psychological turmoil from the COVID-19 virus unfolds. Plus fire, plus social unrest, plus whatever is happening in your life. You see, when our marriage has pressure, that pressure turns our cracks into canyons. And what we have as cracks normally under normal circumstances, and perhaps you've been like me, married many years, or perhaps you're newly married, but we live with cracks in our marriage. And you know what? They're not big cracks, and we put up with them. It's okay, you know. My wife can be wrong. Just seeing if you're awake. Yeah. I learned years ago, don't say too much bad about her because somebody will get offended and come up afterwards and say, you. But we put up with cracks in our marriage. We put up with cracks because they're not really that big of a deal, and you know what? We overlook them and they're okay. And we're, you know, so she or he, whoever squeezes the toothpaste at the wrong part of the tube. That's right. Just chuckle. We know what that means. But the problem now is that the pressure that has come in this year has turned those cracks into canyons. And when we have those cracks turn into canyons, they push us either towards control or escape. I talked about that a little last week. You see, when all of a sudden our cracks turn into canyons, we either are going to go to control or we're going to go to escape. And it depends whether you're powerful or in a place of weakness. See, if you're in a place of power, you're going to control. You're going to control the person, you're going to try to control the situation, and you're going to try to control the outcomes. But the problem is, as we learned earlier, is that this expectation issue causes the trouble in our relationship. So when we step in and I'm going to control this because there's a crack and the other person in this marriage is not doing what they need to do, I need to control it. And if we don't go to the control because we don't feel we have the power and we feel in a place of weakness, we're going to escape. We'll stay at work longer. We'll go out to coffee with the guys or the gals more. We'll go play golf. We'll go out to the workshop. We'll do anything except be in the relationship because the cracks have turned into canyons. And it's interesting that in a marriage, usually one partner is escaping while the other partner is controlling. And so they go in opposite directions. And the situation does not improve, but only gets worse. And then at some point, a friend, air quotes here, a friend, may say something like, if it's that bad, why don't you get out? Today's question that I want to address is, what can I do? What can I do? Now, if you're sitting there, this is in the first person, so it's not what can I do for you, but it's what you can do for you, right? Okay, just want to make that sure. What can I do to ensure my relationships will thrive under pressure? What can I do to make sure my relationships will thrive under pressure? I want to talk first about the marriage relationship in this, and then we'll go and we'll talk about relationships in general. You have in your notes there, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21 through 25. And Paul, the Apostle Paul, and it's interesting, some people, and I'm probably on the fence here, but some people feel Paul was married and others feel he was never married, but I feel he was married, and some of his advice, he was probably married. You may disagree in a moment. But you'll notice in verse 21, the Apostle Paul is writing and he says, and further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Mutual submission. In other words, Paul is saying, listen, in your relationships, submit one to another. But Bill, realize what they do. They don't deserve my submission. They don't deserve me. You don't know, they're jerks. He is a jerk. She is a jerk. They don't deserve it. Oh, do I say this? Yes. Okay, thank you. You gave me permission. I like that. Neither do you. You don't deserve it either. You see, we are always operating on this position from they don't deserve it. Neither do you. And yet Paul is instructing us to mutually submit one to another, not because the other person deserves it, not because the other person does so well that they are submittable, but out of what Christ has done for you, out of reverence to God and his actions on the cross. Paul is saying, listen, in your relationships, here's how I want you to act. I want you to have mutual submission one to another. And then he goes on to explain what that is. You see, mutual submission, by the way, in case you're filling in notes, I need to make sure you get this word. If you're melancholy, you'll want to make sure to fill this in. Mutual submission is one of the marks of a successful marriage. And then Paul goes on to say, for wives. So now he says, for wives, what does this mutual submission look like? And Paul says, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. I just lost some of you, half of you. The other half are going, yes. You see, this is where you may half of you say, Paul wasn't married. It was very obvious. For wives, and that word submit really gets into us like, ah. But it's interesting to note that the word submit's not in the original writings of Paul. It's been added afterwards. So really what Paul was saying is, listen, for wives, this means to your husband as to the Lord. Isn't that much better? To your husbands as to the Lord. And he goes on to explain why, but then we go to verse 25, because this is, he says, and you husbands, this is what it looks like to you. This means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. And he goes on and says, and died for her. So all he is saying is, listen, husbands, all you have to do is die for her. Just lay your life down for her. That's what mutual submission looks like on your side. Wives, it looks like unto your husband as to the Lord. And guys, just lay your life down for her and die. Mutual submission. So how do cracks become canyons in a marriage? You have there some diagrams, and I want to just put up some highly refined diagrams that we drew. I know, they are wows. And you see, God, and then there's the wife and the husband, and as we're mutually submitted to God, and we're mutually submitted to each other, it works. That's the way God intended this thing to work. And as we come together and we walk this way, mutually submitted, then something works. But you'll notice in the second diagram, something is missing. And it's God. Now, that doesn't mean we're not Christians, because a lot of Christians do this too. Instead of having God there, we put lots of other things there. Maybe it's the kids. You know, getting the kids and the kids. You know, there's so many mothers who, when the girls and boys come along, they forget the big kid. And it's all about the kids. You know, and then they grow up a little and they're in junior high and high school, and then it's all about getting the kids to the sports events and to the practices and all like that. Maybe we stick in their career. It's about our career. It's about advancing our career. It's about maybe building a business if you're into building a business, or getting our financial goals in place. And so all we're doing is we're putting our financial goals into work. Or if you're a guy, maybe it's your toys. But God, not in the center. And we try to put something else there, and it doesn't work. Because mutual submission works best when we first are submitted to God, and then out of that submittedness, we submit to each other. So you might say, okay, Bill, I'll submit. What does that mean? It means basically serving each other. Basically means getting in their corner, being on their team. My wife likes the metaphor of team members. Whenever we're talking about situations and couples and different things, she always talks about whether they're on their team, are on the team or not, or are they on each other's team. And so when we submit, what we'll do is we'll simply get on our spouse's team. We'll be in their corner. We'll serve them. But what do I do with my expectations? I mean, I still have these expectations. What do I do with them? And that's a great question. But it's a bigger question than just marriage. You see, in marriage, we submit to one another. But yet, in life, we still have these expectations. And so Peter tells us what to do with our expectations. In marriage, we submit one to another, a husband to a wife to a husband, and both of us to God, not because the other person deserves it, but because what God has done for us. So what do we do with our expectations? First Peter. Now, Peter was married, and so we know that. But 1 Peter, this is for all relationships. 1 Peter 5:5. And all of you, he's just addressed elders and stuff. He's addressed the leadership team, and now he says, and all of you, dress yourselves in humility as you relate one. So what Peter is saying, listen, when you are going to interact with each other, don't come up from a place of pride or a place of weakness, but come with humility as you relate one to another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. God opposes those who try to control with expectations. God opposes. Do you know who you don't want as your opponent? God. It's just really because he's going to win. You don't want him as your opponent because he wins. Just ask Jacob. And so when we come in and we're going to interact, and we don't come with humility, but we come with pride or weakness even. But when we come, and I'm going to control this situation. Woman, I know what needs to be done in the kitchen. Not only does God oppose me, but so does my wife. But God gives grace to the humble. The best definition of grace I've ever heard is divine enablement. And divine enablement really wraps up this word of grace. God opposes the proud, but gives divine enablement when you humble yourself and serve others. Are you wrestling with a relationship outside of your marriage, maybe at work, maybe with your kids? You see, the answer is humility. We think the answer is control. I got to tell them what to do. I've got to fix the situation. It's them. I do work in conflict resolution, as most of you know. And it's amazing to me how entrenched we are in that it is the other person's fault. And all I have to do is get them to do what I want them to do, and everything will be fine. But Peter says, listen, humble yourself and God will give you divine grace. So humble yourself under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, He will lift you up in honor. I like that. Basically, what Peter is saying is, listen, if you will humble yourself and bring your expectations to God and you won't put them on the other person, God will lift you up. That's cool. What that means is that if I go home and I fix lunch for Dorothy, and I'm really good all week, that by Friday, God's going to lift me up. And I like that. Except that little phrase, at the right time. I don't like that phrase. I don't like it when it's God's timetable. I like my timetable better. I like my timetable on being lifted up better. Okay, God, hurry up and lift me up. I've been serving her for 4 days now. Notice what Peter says. Give all of your worries and cares, give all your expectations to God. For He cares about you. See, when we will bring our expectations to God and leave them there, God is then in a position to do something for us out of His love. When the pressure is on, may I encourage you to choose humility and give up control and let Jesus write a new story in your relationships. Now, I have to be honest with you. This is a daily exercise for me. And I think I'm not alone in this, but I have expectations on other people. I have expectations on my wife. It was interesting just this morning. Don't go there, dear. Don't go there. And I told her, I said, oh, this is going to be a sermon illustration. You'll never know when it's going to come out. But just this morning, I had an expectation on my wife. I had an unspoken expectation and an unrealistic expectation. You're waiting to see if I'm going to tell you what it was. Well, I like cooking with basil. And I just bought a new basil plant. Trader Joe's, wonderful basil plants. And a branch had broken off, and this morning I was up early and getting my coffee, and I noticed the branch. I thought, oh, what a great, we'll put that in the refrigerator, and I'll use it later today. And later I Took a shower, got dressed, came in, and my wife was in the kitchen. And I noticed the branch was gone, the broken branch, the wilted leaves. And I said, what'd you do with the basil that was broken? She said, I threw it away. What do you mean you threw it away? I was going to use that this afternoon. You see, we make a practice of walking through life with great expectations that we place on others. And I must lay them down. And I must do it every day. I must lay them down and trust Jesus to work in me and them while he writes a new story in my relationships. But he can't write the story as long as I'm in control. So maybe the next steps, and I have them in your notes, maybe I can give you some next steps. Choose a troubled relationship. Maybe it's in your marriage. Maybe it's at work. Maybe it's with a child. Maybe it's with a neighbor. And sit down and write out. Write out a list of your expectations you have on that person. Write them out. And then take your list and give it to God. I mean literally, give it to God. However you might do that, you might tear it up, you might burn it up, you might crumple it up. But give it to God and say, God, I'm going to give you my expectations. I'm going to trust you to work in them and me. I want to encourage you today. You see, we're in a time when our relationships are under more pressure than they've been in a long time. I mean, I hear it. I see it. I'm really bothered by the pressure that our marriages and our relationships are under. And let me tell you what I think is one of the saddest things that can happen. And that is to find a couple that you know well. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, you hear they're divorced or getting divorced. And you said, wait, why didn't we know about this? Why didn't we know about this? Listen, my friends, fight for your relationships. Fight for your marriage. We are under more pressure than ever before, but fight for your marriage with humility. Because when you do it with humility, that is when Jesus can write a new story in your relationship. And I want to remind you that God opposes the proud, but gives grace, divine enablement to those who humble themselves before him. I'd like to pray. I'd like to pray for marriages and relationships that are under pressure. And again, last week, I have fear and trembling when I say I'm going to ask you to stand because we're all so private. But may I just say that if you have a relationship, maybe it's at home, maybe it's not at home, maybe it's with a neighbor, whatever it is, I want to pray for you, and I'm going to invite you to stand because I think that first step is a step of humility that we need to take, one that says, I'm not in control. I'm willing to trust you, God. So if you have a relationship that needs help, would you please stand and let me pray for you? Just go ahead and stand right here if you have a relationship that needs help. Thank you for just your honesty. And I know it's tough to do that. Father, we stand before you. I stand before you too. Because we need your help. We need, first of all, to know that we can fight and win the battle. We need a confidence that you're there to write a new story as we let go of control. Father, I pray that you will help each of us to become humble, to submit one to another in our marriages, to serve, to get on the other person's team, not throw them under the bus, but to serve them. Help us. And help us to not carry expectations of what we want others to do that are unreasonable, unspoken. But help us to lay them down and let you write a new story in our relationships. I ask it in your Son's name and for his sake. Amen. Amen. You may be seated.